Thank you all for loving and serving us with your gifts. Well, good morning, Bridge family. My name is Nathan. I'm one of the pastors here, and if this is your first time, if you're with us all the time, I'm glad that you are here. We hope you feel safe and welcome. We're at the end of a short series walking through encounters with Jesus after the resurrection. Pastor Boone had a couple amazing sermons talking about how Jesus meets us in the midst of our grief, talking about Mary and when she was mourning her friend at the empty tomb. He talked about how Jesus meets us in the midst of our doubts with Thomas, in the midst of questions that we have and the real struggles of everyday life. And today we're going to finish with Peter. So to start with some controversy, you can discuss it later what your preferred pronunciation is, but one of my favorite gifs is Homer Simpson disappearing into a bush. It feels appropriate in far too many situations, where sometimes we just want to disappear. And it provides some comic relief for something that we all feel at some point, which is shame. And shame is universal, but it can be hard to describe. It could be what you feel when your child starts screaming or acting out in public, and you suddenly want to disappear with an invisibility cloak as quickly as possible. And you move from "my child's having a hard time" to "I'm a bad parent and everyone in this store thinks so." It could be the way your stomach drops when someone says, "I thought you were still married. What happened?" Or when you fall back into the addiction or the toxic relationship or the unhealthy pattern that you've tried to get out of, and you just start thinking, "This is just who I am." Or maybe it shows up with the defensiveness when somebody in good faith critiques you and you feel like it's attacking your identity. Shame is that voice or feeling that says, "I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. I need to hide." And shame leads to hiding. If we go back in the story of the Bible, it's what Adam and Eve did in the garden. As soon as they ate the fruit, it said they were naked and ashamed, and they tried to hide themselves with fig leaves. And I've never tried to cover myself with fig leaves, but I don't think they do that good of a job. But ever since then, we, in the midst of our shame, have been trying to hide ourselves, trying to hide our vulnerability. And so it's what also leads Peter in the story we'll look at today back to his fishing boat in the midst of hiding. And it's what leads me and you to hide even today. And before we jump in, I want to differentiate just quickly between the ideas of guilt and shame. Because guilt says, "I did something wrong." And shame goes a step further and says, "Because of that, I am wrong. There's something wrong with the core of me." And whether you're here today and you believe in God or not, I think we're all tempted to sometimes allow shame to define our story and shrink our future. So when we come today to this text in the Gospel of John and we encounter a similar reality, people like you and me in the midst of life, trying to process complex and challenging events, and Peter in the midst of that comes face to face with his own failings. And he's tempted to let shame define his story and shrink his future. So the question we'll ask today is, how does Jesus meet us in the midst of our shame? Please pray with me. Lord, we thank you that you are a God who sees us and knows us and loves us. And so I pray, Lord, that you would meet us today in your word, or whatever people are bringing with them today, whatever they're feeling, whatever voices are loud in their mind and in their heart, Lord, that they would hear your voice, maybe for the first time. We love you, God. We need you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So we're going to be in John chapter 21, and we're going to be looking at a lot of text, so I just encourage you, if you can, grab the Bible in front of you. It's on page 529. And I'll just say, before we jump in, let's remember Peter was a passionate guy. Imagine like a football fullback. He knows to go full steam ahead no matter what the play call is. Good or bad situations, he is going full steam ahead. And the last time he had seen Jesus, he had promised him that whatever happens, whatever goes on, he would never betray him. He would never leave his side. But then, as Jesus is being crucified in the midst of his fear and doubt, Peter denies Jesus not once, but 3 times, and he even starts cussing to prove he wasn't with him. And when that happens, he hears a rooster crow, he remembers what Jesus said, and he weeps, and he runs, and he hides. And then we have the story in John 21. You'll see in verse 1, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. We'll see again and again that Jesus pursues us in the midst of our shame. Jesus pursues us in the midst of our shame. In verse 3, it says, Simon Peter said to them, to those that were with him, his buddies, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we'll go with you. And Peter, as he's returning to fishing, he's going back to what's familiar. He'd spent all this time with Jesus. He'd been a part of something so beautiful. He'd had a big purpose. He'd had a role, and yet his shame pushes him to return to that which he knows. And that's what shame does, and it doesn't just make us feel bad, but it freezes us. It tells us this is who you are now. And so Peter isn't just going fishing. He's going back to a life before his calling, before purpose, because shame has convinced him he disqualified himself. But Jesus pursues him there. It says that night they caught nothing. And sometimes Jesus allows our attempts at self-rescue, our attempts at hiding, to fall short, not to punish us, but to bring us back to dependence. And maybe you're here today and that's what you're feeling, like all of your attempts are running out. And I just encourage you, look to Jesus today. Because Jesus is there on the shore. We're told in verse 4, he stood on the shore as day was breaking. And then something amazing happens. He talks to them and he tells them to fish on the other side of the boat. And a miraculous catch happens. It says they were not able to haul in the amount of fish that they got. And so then in verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, basically cries out, this has to be Jesus. And Peter, bold and brash and brave, for whatever reason, puts on his clothes and jumps into the water. I don't know about you, but that doesn't work too well for me. But he jumps in and he runs to shore. And it says they weren't that far off. So chances are everybody else in the boat got to shore and Peter's there flailing, fully clothed, trying to get to Jesus because there's this joy in Peter because he sees and knows Jesus is pursuing him. And isn't that what we want and need desperately in the midst of our shame and our desire to hide? To know that we're loved, that somebody still cares about us. I know it's happened to me a few times. You walk into a room, maybe it's a party, maybe it's church, maybe it's a new group, and you look around and you're like, I don't know anybody. I feel out of place. Why did I even put clothes on to come out? I should have just stayed at home. What's the point of this? And then a friend or somebody sees you from afar and yells your name and comes and gives you a hug. And you suddenly feel welcome and seen. And just an aside, that's what I hope, that's what I pray that church is like. Is that in the midst of whatever we've done that week, in the midst of feeling like we don't belong, in the midst of maybe being gone for weeks and months at a time, is that we have somebody call our name, give us a hug and say, you belong here. So know that Jesus pursues you in the midst of your shame. You're not too far. When the enemy whispers that you are not enough, that something is wrong with you, know that Jesus is right there moving towards you. But we got a mic switch. Watch out. This looks even classier. Look at that thing. Watch out. So, Jesus is right there in the midst of that, moving towards us. But here's the fear that we might have. If somebody actually knew me, if somebody knew what they were walking towards, if somebody knew what I'd done, they would run. And so let's see what Jesus does next. As soon as Peter gets to shore, he's struck by something. When they get out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out and bread. A charcoal fire and breakfast. I love breakfast. So I love that Jesus loves breakfast. But there are many times fire is mentioned in the Bible, but in the New Testament there are only 2 charcoal fires. There was one at Peter's betrayal, and there was one right here. So that charcoal fire, that memory is engraved in Peter's head. As he smells that smoke, as he sees that fire, it brings to the surface his shame and vulnerability in a new way. When he, in front of others, he didn't know, he said, I do not know Jesus. I do not know the man I saw heal. I do not know the man that I saw feed 5,000 people. I do not know the man that healed my mother-in-law on her deathbed. I do not know that man. At that fire, he literally invoked curses upon himself that he did not know him. And so he sees this fire and it brings it up. And as they're eating, Jesus starts talking to Peter in verse 15. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he hasn't called Peter Simon, son of John, since he first met him. He's bringing him back. He's recounting their history together. And yet that question, do you love me more than these? He's using the same words Peter said. When the night before Jesus was betrayed, Peter said, even if all these other people betray you, I won't. In the front of all of his friends, he said, these jokers, they might leave your side, but I'm never going to leave your side. And so what Jesus is doing is inviting him to look honestly at his shame, to look deeply at what he has done and the shame he carries because of his choices. And what's amazing is he doesn't take him aside and say, don't worry about all that denial stuff, Peter, let's just move on. It's a new day. He invites him to look honestly at it so that he may find healing. Because the truth about shame is it quickly gains a force of its own. It can be like a snowball going downhill, and especially when we make mistakes, we can start to absorb them as an identity. Peter had made a mistake, but it was beginning to define him, to hold him back. And so Jesus invites him to look at it honestly in the presence of a friend to find healing. There's an author and speaker, Brené Brown, who has done incredible research and work around shame and vulnerability and the power that it wields. And after years of research, she's had this to say. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you want to see shame grow in your life, secrecy, silence, and judgment. Don't talk about it. Don't name it. And let your own judgment or the perceived judgment of others control things. And what's amazing about this quote as I read it and looking at what Jesus does is he brings the shame front and center. He names it. He brings it into the light. And he has a conversation over breakfast to show his love. He's telling Peter and he's showing Peter we have to look honestly at this to find healing. And we too are called to look honestly at our shame. And I want to name here that sometimes looking at our shame can lead to more shame. It's easy to become ashamed of our shame. And how frustrating is that? How annoying does that get? And so, what we're invited to do is ask for grace for ourselves and the grace of Jesus as we look at our own story and our own life. And to be curious about it. Where does it show up? How and where do I see it? And ask for Jesus to be present with you as you look at it. And I just encourage you to reflect. What's the thing that you swore you would never do again? The mistake you saw your parents make that you said you would never do. The poor choice that still dominates your mind. I'd encourage you this week, stop hiding in prayer, but tell God exactly what you're ashamed of. He already knows it. Don't let it push you away from Him and others. But you may say, here's the fear. If I look there, I'm scared I'll be stuck there. And so let's look at how Jesus responds. He asks him, do you love me? And he ends up asking him that question 3 times. He said to him a second time, do you, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And then he asks him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And if we're not careful when we read that, we might input our own story and imagine Jesus is being kind of patronizing. Like, really, Peter, come on. Do you actually love me? You know what you did. But that's not what he's doing. He's being gentle and kind here, traveling with him through the feelings of shame. And he asks him 3 times because 3 symbolizes completeness, but also because Peter had denied him 3 times. Jesus doesn't want Peter to just have a surface level healing, but he wants his healing and grace to go deeper than the shame. He names the depths of the shame so that healing can reach even lower. And that's what's amazing. In verse 17, when Peter's asked the 3rd time, it says, Peter was grieved because he said it in the 3rd time. His heart was cut. It hurt him. And what's amazing, I believe, is that what Jesus is doing doesn't cause the pain, but reveal it. Jesus' question reveals the pain, the sickness, disease that's deep in Peter that has the potential to cause sickness throughout his whole life, and says, I want to root that out. Just like if you repaint a cracked wall without fixing the foundation, the cracks are going to return worse than before. You're going to have problems that are bigger. If the healing is going to go as deep as the shame, Jesus has to go deep beneath the surface. And the work that God does in His grace on your life and on your story is free, but it won't be a painless process. If you want to find healing, it's going to cause some pain, but He restores us from the depths of our shame. He goes low because grace pools in low places so that we may know healing in a deeper way. I love this quote. Author Jasmine Holmes, she says, the story of shame is a powerful one, but even stronger are the arms of the one who carried your shame and will never cast you out. Sometimes the narratives we believe, the stories you tell yourself, the mistakes that you let define you, the ones that others may still define you for, can feel powerful and overwhelming, but I want you to know the arms of Jesus are stronger. And He carried your shame and He will never cast you out. And if you want healing to happen, don't expect it to be painless. If you're feeling stuck in life, if you want to get out of ruts, it's not a painless or simple path. Sometimes it requires looking at places of deep pain so that God's grace and the love of others can come in and bring healing. But here is the fear. It's one thing to be forgiven, It's another thing to think we could actually be used by God. It's another thing to think that we actually have purpose that's bigger than the mistakes we've made, the stories we've told ourselves, the things that have been done to us. So let's look again at how Jesus restores Peter. He asks him this question 3 times. Do you love me? And each time he says, you know that I love you. Jesus says to him, feed my sheep. He says him again, feed my sheep, tend to my sheep. He invites him into his purpose. And he says there is responsibility for you to step into. And he ends this interaction by saying, follow me. So what Jesus does is he commissions us beyond our shame. Shame had kept Peter trapped, and shame can keep me and you trapped. Jesus had given him a purpose, a calling, and a role to play, and he returned to what was familiar because of shame. And I'll be honest, what may have been even harder for Peter was that these choices that he made, his denial of Jesus, came after he'd been following Jesus for 3 years. Sometimes we're okay if there's mistakes in our life. For those of us that are followers of Jesus, we're okay talking about mistakes we made before we knew Jesus. But it's hard to accept that sometimes the worst mistakes we've made came after we would say we were a follower of Jesus. And so Peter is here, and he's saying, he's having to confront, yeah, I know I did some crazy things when I was younger, but after I'd walked with and talked with Jesus for 3 years, when he was at his lowest, I denied him. I can't come back from that, Jesus. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Follow me. Shame limits, but Jesus restores, releases, and empowers. And he doesn't say prove yourself. He doesn't say try harder, but step into what you've been called to. And so maybe you've believed the lie, I'll never be good enough. And when you start to think and dream about how God might use you and your story, the voice in your head says, who do you think you are? And I want you to know those are lies. And Jesus has bigger plans in store for you. He commissions us beyond our shame. He did it with Peter, and he'll do it with you. God often does his deepest work in our places of deepest pain. But sometimes, if we're honest, we fear our own healing. Because if we're healed, we can't hide anymore. It's got to be out front. Our scars are visible for those to see. And yet our scars can be a way that God uses us and our stories to care for others. Psychologist Kurt Thompson, he wrote an excellent book called The Soul of Shame. And he said this, shame is a primary means to prevent us from using the gifts we've been given. Shame holds us back. And what's so tragic is it doesn't just trap us, but it deprives those around us of the gifts God has given us. So I just encourage you to consider this week, what are you being called to? What is an area of gifting that you long to see God use, and are you willing to ask him to show you how to use it? To move beyond the shame that has kept you trapped. And some of you may be here and you've disqualified yourself before you even started. You said, God can't use me because of this. Yet everyone has a gift and something to offer. And our gifts and our presence are a gift to others. So how does Jesus meet us in the midst of our shame? He pursues us in our shame. He invites us to look honestly at our shame, and he restores us from the depths of our shame, and he commissions us beyond our shame. And so as I close, I just want you to imagine that fire scene again. We all have some smells that maybe bring us back. Certain memories, certain rooms that we'll walk into. And that's how it was for Peter. So Jesus takes him on a journey through his memory. The last time he stood by that charcoal fire, he denied Jesus. And the next time he stood by it, Jesus restored him. It was the same fire. He was surrounded by people again, but there's a different ending. Restoration, not failure, has the last word. And some of you are here, and sometimes I find myself here, and we're stuck standing by the first fire. It's locked in our memory. We're replaying the mistake. We're replaying the narrative. We're replaying the voices of condemnation. And I want you to know Jesus sees and hears it all, but he has built another fire. And he is not there to further the shame. He is there to restore you. And he says, follow me. He will not be pushed away by your shame. He came to remove it. He went to the cross bearing our shame, our disgrace, our pain, and says, I will crown you with glory and honor. You will be a son and a daughter of the King. You won't be defined by what you've done and what's been done to you, but you'll be defined by whose you are. That you belong to the Creator of the heavens and the earth. And he invites you and me into that. To look to him. To put our trust in him. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the 1,000th time, but again and again looking to him and saying, Lord, will you rewrite my story? Your worst moment does not get the last word. Jesus' resurrection does. Shame says, stay here, and Jesus says, follow me. Shame says, hide, and Jesus says, come and eat. So let's let the grace of God go deeper than our regret and our shame, and turn to him again today. Your worst moment, your worst memory does not have the final say. Jesus' resurrection does. I'm going to invite the praise team to come up as we prepare for the sacrament of